Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know people are trickling in from the exhibit hall and lunch, so I thank all of you that have made it here so far. My name is Paula Kucharz. I am the Terminal Concessions Manager at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, and I am here with three very interesting new friends, and I'd like to introduce them to you. First is Neil Saunders, Managing Director of Global Data's Retail Division. And in this role, he oversees the development of the company's retail propositions and research output. He works with clients to help them understand retail and shopper and market landscapes, advising them on how to best develop, evolve, and implement business strategies. And prior to Global Data, Neil worked with a firm called Verdict and has done some corporate consulting as well. But the most interesting thing I found is that before moving to the United States, Neil served as the non-executive board director for the Great Western Railway, and a role he held for 11 years. Neil is with us. Next to him is Lewis Allen, director of Portland Design. And Lewis leads projects to define brand strategy and create customer propositions to design customer experience across multiple touch points, and that seems to be our word today. Sasha really talked about touch points. Lewis is going to go into that a little bit. Lewis crafts brand experiences using future-ready perspective combined with a customer-centric focus, and he has worked with a large range of duty-free operators, including Dufry and Lagardère. And last but not least is Darin Held, co-founder of Bloommiami. He's a brand strategist and a creative consultant, and he's been doing that for about 20 years, lives in Miami, got out of Columbus, where it was mighty cold, and has surrounded himself with a group of really well-known retail and industry operators, T-Mobile, Dom Perignon, Jack Daniels, L'Oreal, Walgreens, etc. So the gentlemen are going to do their presentations, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards, so if you would hold your questions. So first is Neil.
Thanks very much, Paula, and thank you, everyone, for coming. And what I wanted to do today is just talk about trends in retail and think about how those apply specifically to airport retailing. And actually, to be in airport retail is actually quite fortunate at the moment, because if you look at retail consumer expenditure growth across the next 5 years out to 2021, we forecast that overall retail in the US will grow by around 14.9%, so just shy of 15%. Now that's actually quite a slow rate of growth. It's definitely slower than we saw historically before 2008 and the downturn. But if you look at the total spend at US airports, that's going up by about 28.3%. Part of that because airports are doing so much to make the retail offer relevant. So it's actually a very fortunate time to be in airport retail. But of course, airport retail is not immune from many of the trends that are happening in wider retail. And I want to focus on just 5 key things that I think are really important to consider in the landscape and how those are impacting the market. The first one of these is that we're very cautious as consumers. This chart here shows something from our consumer sentiment tracker that we run every single month with around 2,000 US consumers. We ask them lots of questions, and one of the things we ask them is how they expect their own finances to change over the next 6 months. And this chart is an index. We take all the people who say, well, things will get better, and we subtract from that all the people who say things will get worse. And the more negative the number on our index, the worse sentiment is. And you can see that whilst it's recovered since 2014, and actually going into the beginning of this year, we saw some fairly reasonable uplifts, it's still only at around 16.9, which actually is very, very low. So people are very cautious still. They're not going out and spending loads. They're being very careful with their money. They're being very considered in their purchases. And if you think about what that means for airport retailing, it means similar things to what it means in retail overall. You've got to inspire people. You can't expect people just to come and buy things. You've got to really inspire them and make them want to buy, because they're very cautious and their natural gut reaction is, do I really need to buy this? Should I be spending this money? So you have to make them really inspired. You also have to have tiered offerings. You have to make sure that you are catering for people who are a little bit price constrained, they want to buy something but they don't want to spend a lot. But then, of course, you also have to cater for people who still are willing and able to splash out and buy higher-end goods. And we've seen that happen across retail. If you look at a retailer like Target, for example, it's put a lot of effort into its entry brands like Market Pantry to make those really competitive, really good value for money. But then it's done a lot of things with its more premium brands like Archer's Farms to give people who want to trade up that option. So you have to think about how offers are tiered so you can cater for people who are very constrained and people who are a bit more willing to splash out. You also have to mix needs and wants, because the truth is we don't always want to go out and buy things that we don't necessarily need, but we do have a need to buy things. And if you look across the US retail landscape, one of the really interesting things that's happening at the moment is a lot of malls are integrating supermarkets. The Natick Mall in Massachusetts is integrating a Wegmans supermarket. The reason it's doing that is because it's trying to put in some needs. We all need to go grocery shopping, so that draws people in, it gets them interested in shopping, and then they go and have a look at some other things. And I think that's quite relevant for airport retail as well, mixing those wants and needs. The second thing is that we're very jaded as consumers, and this again is from our consumer surveys. In 2006, 28% of Americans said that, shopping has become a bit boring. In 2011, that number was 39%, and last year it was 50.8%, so it's just broken through that 50% barrier. And it's not really surprised that we're a bit bored with shopping. If you think about it, when you got your first iPhone, how fantastic was it? It was brilliant. Brilliant thing that you were prepared to spend a lot of money on. Nowadays, Apple puts a lot of effort into developing a new iPhone. We get it and we say, great, it's got a better camera. Fair enough. So we're a bit jaded because it takes a lot to impress us. And I think that we're very saturated with product. We've been a bit spoiled. So our natural inclination is that, shopping's a bit boring, it's a bit samey. So for airport retail, I think the ways to try and get around that are, first of all, be unique. Try to create a sense of place. People do not want to come into an airport necessarily and see basically a shopping mall that they can go to on an average Sunday. It's dull. Shopping malls aren't doing very well, so there's an indication that that's not a great offer. And I listened yesterday to a presentation by Walt Froman from Portland Airport, and I was really interested to see all of the kind of local offers and propositions and retailers that they were putting in, and it created something that's very unique and very interesting. And I think that gets around this idea of people being jaded. It gives them something that's a bit interesting to look at. Also look to services, because whilst we're bored with buying things, we're not bored with services. We spend a lot of money on beauty services, we spend a lot of money on entertainment, we still spend a lot of money on food service and dining out. And again, in yesterday's presentation, Lorraine O'Neill talked about her 10-minute manicures, a really great offering that adds great value because it's something people want and people are prepared to spend on. So I think services are a great way to get around people being jaded. And again, in retail, if you look at Macy's, it's adding Blue Mercury, a brand that it bought, into its stores to really give a service offering as well as a product offering. And change and churn is important as well. You can't just keep things exactly the same. You can't keep the offer looking similar year after year. You have to shake it up, mix it up a bit. And again, in the world of retail, if you look at a retailer like Bon-Ton Stores, which put its numbers out this morning, its fourth quarter results, they've actually done something quite interesting. They've put a little pop-up in some of their stores called Close to Home, and they source from the local community, artisans, all sorts of different products, whether it be food products, home products, and they put them in that area, and it's constantly changing. And actually, it's not made the numbers that great this morning, but it's certainly helped take the edge off some of the decline. So you have to think about how you can keep changing the mix and making it interesting and relevant. We're also shopping differently. What this slide here shows is the change in the total of number of annual visits by US shoppers from 2006 to 2016. Department stores have seen a 53% almost 54% decline in the number of visits. Visits are down by 1.15 billion over that time. We are making 1.15 billion fewer visits to department stores. Shopping malls haven't fared much better. Obviously, department stores anchor a lot of shopping malls, so that's hardly surprising. Their visits are down by just over a third, almost 34%. That's why a lot of malls are shutting. That's why we're seeing a lot of empty space in malls. Online, however, the number of visits that we make to shop online since 2006 has gone up by 2,800%, just over. We've seen something like 23 billion visits an increase of 23 billion visits to online sites. Now, that doesn't mean to say people are buying things on those occasions, but they are visiting to go shopping all of the different sites. Now, that shows you in a nutshell how much the retail environment has changed. And I think whilst this is outside of airports, it does have some really important implications for airport retail. The first one is that people are more au fait with technology, with online shopping, and there's an opportunity, I think, for airports to use technology very effectively. If you have click and collect, can someone order products before they come into the airport? Whilst they're in the airport, can they look at what stores have got what products in stock and place an order? These kind of things are becoming very much part of the consumer journey, and I think airports have got to start thinking about how they can integrate that. Some already have, some have got further to go, but I think it's definitely an area that is of very great interest to consumers. I also think that with the number of visits to shopping malls declining, one of the things that actually is a big problem for a lot of brands is how do we get exposure, how do we get seen? Because previously what they would have done is say, right, I'll go into this mall or that mall, lots of people are coming through, I'll get seen, I'll get the exposure, I can grow out from there. That doesn't happen anymore because those malls have seen declining footfall. Airports in general have seen footfall rise across the past 5 years and we'll see it rise further. So actually airports are a great place for brands to be discovered. It's much more difficult to get discovered on the web because it's so crowded. You do need that physical anchor sometimes. So an airport can be a great place for a brand to launch or test or actually just be exposed to a lot of people coming through. And that includes local brands that want a bigger international presence because, of course, airports deliver that customer traffic. So I actually think the problem with shopping malls is actually a benefit for airport retail in some ways. The other thing is when we shop online, we have so much choice. There's tons and tons of products. We have infinite choice, more or less. So choice doesn't impress us anymore. Just having hundreds and hundreds of types of clothing or tops or skirts or dresses or whatever you're buying, it isn't really impressive. So what actually people want is curated choice. Less is more. They want editing down. They want to see things that are very relevant and interesting to them. And I think airport retail has been quite good at this because there have to be disciplines around space. But I actually think it's a lesson that can be learned further. And you can look very carefully at how the offers within store and also within the whole mix are curated. And it is that message of don't just throw things at the customer, really think about how the proposition fits together, think about what you're offering and how that's relevant to the consumer. Don't just provide lots and lots of product choice. And in airports, it's particularly important because from our consumer surveys, one of the things we find is, of course, people are harried. They don't always have time to look through lots of stuff. So they want to have more of an edited choice. They can make decisions relatively quickly. The other thing that's interesting in retail overall is that we demand value now. This chart here shows the growth of the off-price market in US retail. And you can see in 2011 it was about $52.8 billion. And by 2021 we're forecasting that it will be over double that, about $109 billion. Now impressively, TJX accounts for at the moment, 2016, accounts for 41% of all of those sales, which gives you an indication of how impressive TJX is. But it's not just TJX. If you look at the department stores, they're all spinning off off-price variants because we want that value. Nordstrom has Nordstrom Rack. Nordstrom Rack has about an 8.1% market share of the off-price market. It's actually quite a big player there, and it's growing far faster than Nordstrom's mainstream stores because we all want value for money. Doesn't mean low price, but we don't want to have to pay over the odds, even for good brands. So we are much more value conscious now than we used to be. And I think for airport retail, there are some implications. The first thing is I think duty-free is not irrelevant, but it is a little bit less effective, because the fact is we can get loads of bargains on the high street or in the shopping mall. We don't have to go to duty-free to get cheap products. We can actually get them more or less every day, and we can search them out on the internet as well. So I think, you know, duty-free isn't quite the pull that it once was. I also think bargains and deals are important. People, especially in the US, have become very attuned to bargains and deals. They love the idea, the consumer loves the idea that you can pay under the asking price for something. So, you know, offering people vouchers, coupons, deals, even before they've checked in or come to the airport, can be a great way to get them interested in retail and get them buying at the airport. So I think that's quite important. I also think there's an opportunity to do exclusives. If something's exclusive to your airport, a brand that you can't get elsewhere or a product that you can't get elsewhere, well, of course, it doesn't have any price competition because there's nowhere to compare it against. So that can be a buffer against that value-conscious consumer. But the other thing that I think is also important, as well as the value trend, what we've also seen is a lot of brands like Coach or Ralph Lauren taking a lot more control over their brands, saying, we don't want to be in Macy's, we don't want to be in JCPenney because they're always discounting. And a lot of these brands like Coach, Michael Kors are withdrawing from the department store channel, and they're doing a lot through their own stores. I think that's a great thing for airport retail, because these brands and many more brands, including niche brands like Vineyard Vines, they have their own store development and their own channel development firmly on the radar. And of course, within airports, they can open their own shops, and I think they'll be much more attuned and interested in doing those sorts of things rather than looking to department stores or the mainstream part of retail to grow. So I think that trend actually has some real positives for retail. Those are some trends, but I think one of the things that's really important is that you have to bear in mind the context. You can't just take those trends and say, oh, fine, let's do a bit of each of those. You have to really think about what is relevant to your own airport and your own situation. And I think airports have a very complicated time because there's a very varied mix of customers. Now, from our consumer surveys, we've done lots of segmentation. I've just broken the airport shopper mindset into what we see as 4 main segmentations. The dasher, which is the person who's on their way to a meeting, they're late, they're really not interested in anything, they just want to get to the gate and onto the plane. The carefree person, which is a kind of an older traveller usually, they may be going on leisure, it may be a kind of semi-business trip, it might be to see friends, but they have a lot of time, they have quite a high disposable income, they're very attuned to browsing, they're very attuned to shopping. The from A to B, which is a person who basically is using the airport as a bus or train terminal. It's just a functional journey. They need to get from this place to this place. So they might be interested in spending, but it's not foremost on their radar. And then the big vacationers, they tend to be the families. They go on a big vacation, they're really excited. They're really interested in retail. They're quite up for buying something, although maybe they're a little bit more price conscious. And if you think about what is important to these people, for the dasher, it's quite obvious. It's about speed, it's about ease, it's about being solution focused. They like customer service and to be treated well, and they really want time efficiency. So a bit like we heard with 10-minute manicures yesterday. Oh, great, I can get my nails done in 10 minutes. I need to get them done. That's really efficient. So that's a service that's really relevant for that type of person. The carefree consumer, on the other hand, is very curious. They want to explore. They love finding new brands. They want something that's unique and different. They like indulgence. They're quite attuned to buying luxury because they're usually a little bit more affluent, and they're very service-oriented. So you need to have unique and interesting things for them into the mix, and a little bit of a slower pace as well. The from A to B is about needs and not wants. That person may need to get a coffee, they may need to get a charger for their iPhone. They'll probably get that if you can deliver it to them very efficiently in a reasonable value for money way. They are quite habitual. They might go to the airport regularly, so they don't necessarily go around and explore. They simply go straight to the gate, wait there, get on the plane and get off at the other end. It's all about familiarity for them. So maybe they like brands that they're very aware of, that they've seen before. And they quite like ease as well. So they're not necessarily the most attuned shoppers, even though they might have a little bit of time to go shopping. They're very geared around needs. And then you have the big vacationers. For them, often it's about killing time. They'll get to the airport hours early because they've got the kids in tow and they're cautious about getting their flights. They've got loads of time to waste. They want inspiration and they want fun. This is the start of their holiday. They want to be entertained. They have a treat mentality. Oh, it's my holidays, I'll treat myself. And kind of that caution goes out of the window a little bit in terms of spending. But they are quite cost conscious still, because they've paid a lot for their holiday. Maybe that's blown some of their budget. They don't want to spend over the odds. And they like things that are family friendly. So just within that, you can see that you've got to think about how to cater for all of these different mindsets. And the interesting thing is as well, if you look underneath there, you can see that two of them, the Dasher and the from A to B, have got a brain because they are very rational purchasers. But the other two, the Carefree and the Big Vacationers, have got a heart because they're very emotional purchasers. And you have to think about what is right within your airport for the mix. And just as an example of how different they can be, this is again from our survey work. You can see London Heathrow, a lot of Big Vacationers, some Dashers, a lot of Carefree shoppers, not many A to Bs, because in the UK, although we do domestic flights, it's mostly would take the train to go somewhere. So it tends to be a lot lower in that type of functionality. Put Manchester, New Hampshire on because it's my local airport. And you can see Manchester, New Hampshire, it has loads of people who are A to Bs. The airport is quite a functional place. A lot of people go in, they will go to the gate, they sit down, they get on the plane, they get off at the other end. It's like a bus terminal in effect. It doesn't mean to say you can't inspire these people, but you have to think about it. Not many Big Vacationers, a few Dashers, because you've got business mix there, and a few Carefree shoppers as well. And I think that shows how you have to think very carefully about what is right and relevant for your shopper. I'd leave you with a question as my conclusion, and I think this is a really good question to ask. And it's, would people come to your airport to shop if they weren't traveling anywhere? Now, some airports have opened themselves up, even airside, to non-travelers. And I think that's an acid test. If you can tick that box, I think you've got a really good and a really strong, compelling retail offer. If you can't, maybe there's a bit more thought and a bit more inspiration and excitement that you can inject into the retail mix. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Neil. Another British accent for you to struggle through with. There it is. So Portland Design, we're based in London, and the question on everyone's lips, how to make retail relevant in a fast-changing world, that's a question that we are being asked constantly. All designers, architects, retailers, retail brands. Yeah, the world is changing fast, and there's the clue. So in a sense, there is no answer, there is no solution right now, but there are clues and there are directions. And I think that for retailers, whether they're the operators of the stores or for the operators of the airports or for the brands that are going into those places, it's about creating the right asset. What should we be investing in now that's going to future-proof our future? So we talk about this idea of being future-ready design. And I suppose in this talk, I just want to talk you through some interesting things, good news and bad news. And I think if you like, the challenging news is around this statement: today's changes in retail are not cyclical. This is not going to go away. Everything that everyone's been talking about in terms of new shopper behavior, transactions moving into different places, the omnichannel world, the impact of mobile, etc., 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 it's not going away. And it's going to change fundamentally the future shopper behavior and what is done with space in airports. But there is good news. We believe that the internet and the whole technology platforms that are coming alongside it, they will not kill shops. It's just a different type of shopping. And that will liberate those spaces and those journeys that your customers, your passengers make through airports. It will liberate them to be something else. And the question is, what is that new thing? We've talked about this. We're very familiar with the idea of who those shoppers are, this connected consumer. They want to collaborate. They want to co-create with brands. They want absolute transparency into the brand world. They want to be part of that story. They want to be connected to the communities that also love those brands. And increasingly, they want to know that the stuff they're buying is made by a brand that has a conscience, a CSR responsibility and so on. In a sense, they're moving from this idea of buying stuff, transaction, to interaction. And in that sense, as the general theme, I think, of what you've been hearing along this morning on the keynote was this idea of consumers wanting to participate. They're not just buying things, they want to participate in the things they're buying. So, for example, Foot Locker here, doing audio tours of the sneakers, you can just have a little audio tour that you download to your phone, and it will give you a guided tour around the various stories of the products, the iconic sneakers and so on. It's this idea of content being important to the shopping experience. It's not just the artifact itself. Again, L'Occitane doing a similar thing, using digital technology in store to do this, browsing online, a completely integrated system, but also freeing up, if you like, the staff to talk about products more intimately with the customer, because the shopper can browse themselves and be in control of that. So we're talking about one of the clues to the future, if you like, is away from this idea of point of sale to point of participation. Allowing customers, your passengers, to feel like they can engage with the brands they love under your roofs. Samsung in New York, a classic example of the way that the world is moving in this sense. You can't buy anything here. This is just love at work. If you love Samsung, this is where you get intimate. This is where you get cozy. This is where they create events. This is where they talk about products. They talk about new technologies they're getting into, and they discuss about what it might do to change your life. So it creates that sense of community and a sense of engagement with that brand who's putting the ideas around the future there. Similarly with Sonos, they're not so much interested in selling you speakers, more about the idea of how should music fit in your life, in your home. You go into their store and it's a series of different lifestyle sets, different styles of home. So I'd just like to run you through now some of the ideas that we think you should be embedding into the DNA of your airport, of your stores, or of your brand touch points and your brand engagement points. You should reinvent convenience. Convenience is changing. It's removing all the friction points around the customer journey to make it as seamless and as fast and as easy as possible. And don't fall into the mistake of relying on the technology, saying, fantastic, I've saved myself X amount of dollars on staff. No, customers want the seamlessness, but they want the staff available as well. Service in that sense, and we'll come back to that point a little later on, is going to be very, very important in terms of this new passenger journey, this new customer journey. So there's different examples of how that technology is facilitating convenience, and certainly this technology is a place to go to look for creating a frictionless customer experience. And remember also, frictionless is also about the customer feeling in control. You know, we talk a lot about traveling consumers being stressed by the experience because part of that stress is feeling out of control. So putting them in control of the experience using their own mobile devices or technology is a good thing. Lots of new opportunities, the Internet of Things, everyone talks about the idea of delivering to the boot of your car, something that automatically releases the trunk, of your car so that you can have delivery to your car. Why would you bother traveling with stuff you bought in the airport when you can pick it up from the trunk of your car when you get home, or indeed have it delivered home as well? So technology is facilitating different kinds of convenience. The whole fulfillment cycle within airports could radically change. Why stock stuff on shelves in airports? The consumers are going to be asking us those questions increasingly because it's not the most convenient of ways to buy stuff. So you've got to, in this kind of idea of convenience, let's not forget that convenience is about simplicity and ease, but it's also about immersive experience. And what does that mean? It means a whole bunch of things. And we've talked about this idea of loyalty. In the future, we need to redefine what loyalty means. In the past, it's been earn and burn. The more you spend with me, the more I give you back. But we're going from a world where loyalty is not about just that kind of transactional value. It's going from the buying and selling transactional part to the showing and telling. Loyalty means if you show me and tell me about stuff, show me stuff, tell me about your brand story, give me experience, I'll like you. I want that. I need that. So the showing and telling is becoming important. Examples of this are out there already. Mass Brothers, Williamsburg, and now in London as well. Very transparent about the whole chocolate making process, and yes, you can buy chocolate. Lululemon, virtually invented the athleisure category, but they're not sitting on any laurels here. In this store, you can see the designers at work, you can see what ideas they're working with, and that's at the back of the store. There's no walls to that experience. It's completely transparent. Customers love this stuff. I think Sasha spoke about that this morning, about this idea of, if you can touch people and they can remember that experience, then we've gone a long way to building a loyalty moment. So in a sense, we're going from product to platform. Why is this so much typography on one slide? Very simple. Airports are all about product. It's completely transactional. Most airports are in that domain at the moment. They're not considering this idea of creating moments where you can recruit people to the brand, as Neil was saying. It's an important place to get people exposure to your brands if you're a brand or a retailer. As a platform, as a place, if you do it in the right way, not just work on the price model. So this idea of creating those platforms that can create engagement is very, very important, and various retailers are working on this. We saw the disastrous figures in department stores, and they're kind of desperately trying to catch up with where the consumer's at in life, and platforms like this are some of the solutions to them, with digital platforms like Macy's On Call, which learns about your shopping behavior, and I believe, I've not tried it myself, but it can even detect if you're frustrated. So, the AI part of technology is going to be very interesting in the future in terms of creating better, richer types of consumer engagement. So that's also a good optimistic sign for the future. So it's about this idea in the loyalty world of, perhaps it was product communities in the past and commodities in the past, but now we're moving to the idea of product communities. Groups of people who share the same value sets, who like the same brands, who like what those brands stand for, and they want to be part of that community as part of their sense of self-fulfillment and self-expression. Another clue to what we should be doing with retail in airports is this idea of reimagining the experience. This has fundamental implications for architecture. If you're designing an airport now, building an airport now, I think you really need to think about what kind of physical space you are creating. We call it the idea of soft space. The buzzword in retail is agility. Because we are moving in this fast-changing world, the solution in 1 year's time will not be the same solution in 5 years' time. Airports have struggled with hard architecture, hard space, which has not been able to adapt to the very new types of shopping behavior and offers that are available. So soft space allows new types of experience. Shop with me in Chicago, this is one platform, one idea of many. And it's this idea that you can create a space that any brand could move into, temporarily sort of camp in there and use a technology platform to express itself and bring the consumer to the brand experience. That's one solution. And that can morph and change and be different things from week to week. So this idea of a store set, a stage set, if you like, of a store set. Think of stores as very, very flexible in that agile world. Flexible architecture coming in Frankie Store, Los Angeles. This is an example. This store is made of pieces and parts that can be reconfigured, moved around to create traditional merchandising elements, furniture, or can indeed create an event, a catwalk experience, and so on. So those pieces can be reconfigured, and that's an example of moving towards a softer space. And this is what we talk about. Retailers or people who want to own or curate a shopping experience need to think in beta mindset, rather like software developers who are constantly trying to improve and update. What we build is never the answer. The great ribbon cutting solution moment is that's kind of like it's already old by the time the ribbon hits the floor in that sense. So we really need to kind of think in this mindset. One of the things that airports have not been doing very, very well is the whole collect experience. This is one of ours in Auckland Airport. But it's this idea that click and collect or collect and pre-ordering, the online to offline kind of seamlessness is going to get increasingly important. What is your solution for the collect experience? This is IKEA. Traditionally, 20 to 30,000 square feet, big box. The collection experience, very, very ordinary, shall we say, to be kind. Now they've moved these store units into smaller footprints, into downtown locations. This is where you go to collect your order. So it's an F&B experience. It's a cafe, it's a community. They've got room sets in there. You can get advice on home styling. So it's an opportunity to make that collection experience a lot more of a conversation around your life and what you might need and what you might want to buy in the future, as well as buy Swedish meatballs, of course. So it's about this idea of moving from storytelling to story doing. You know, it gets, in a way, what does that mean? It means that, you know, you can actually do the story. This is Burberry Maker's House. A lot of brands are moving into this space now, creating embassies or brand houses, brand homes, whether they're permanent or temporary, where the consumer can really come into the story of the brand. And in this location, which is a temporary one in London, you can meet silversmiths, you can meet leather workers, and so on. It's a simple message. Burberry is all about craft, craftsmanship, and that's where you go to kind of reconnect with that core brand DNA of Burberry, which may get forgotten when you just see stuff on shelves. So we're seeing more of those kinds of spaces, from the sublime to the ridiculous in that sense. The Nike skate park, you know, again, it's not just about buying skate gear or skate stuff, it's about doing it, you know, actually, you know, get in there and have a go. So in that sense, we are becoming space curators, you know, the owners of spaces that change. And here are some of the drivers that we think we should be using to create those spaces. We call them the 6 E's. One is engagement. You need to talk to people. So the service aspect, you need people in there in the mix that's going to make it different. You need to make it easy. You know, Domino's have created their own emojis that can make ordering a pizza as a one-click event, and that is a beautiful thing. Education, Lush, that great brand, we know it well, they've reinvented themselves. If you're ever in London, go to their flagship on Oxford Street. An amazing experience where the staff not just live the brand and love the brand, they do all of that together in one space. Again, the education part, they bring people into their story about fragrance, what drives them, what makes them passionate. Entertain me, keep me interested. Talked this morning on the keynote once again about this idea that we just want stuff all the time we want to be entertained. We want stimulation all of the time. So airports are no different in that respect. And in the sense, of course, you have a ready-made audience in many cases for bored people. The idea of end use, tell me what I can do. A lot of brands can connect with people on this level of saying, look, you know, we can help you with masterclasses in this case, technology, how to get the most out of your mobile life and devices and so on. And Neil again talked to this point of exclusivity. I mean, frankly, there's no point in buying in an airport if you can buy it in domestic retail or on Amazon and get it click and collect. You have to build in far more exclusivity. You've got to look at your whole real estate, every square meter, and say, how much exclusivity am I putting into my contracts, into my deals? How much can every brand, a tenant brand, whether they're an F&B operator or a retailer, help build that sense of here, I can buy this stuff or I can eat this stuff here and nowhere else? You need a lot. And the final point is this idea of repositioning value. So value, you know, a race to the bottom is price. The traditional role of airports has been we're cheaper. Consumers are cynical about that message. We've been busted in that sense. We're no longer cheaper. Price is no longer the deciding factor. So other types of value are important, like the learning and the knowledge. The idea that people's lives have changed, where people value the ability to broadcast their life around the new things they've learned. And we've got an opportunity to put that content into the minds of people, and they'll get on their phones and value it. So and that's another added value is discovering things you didn't expect to find. One of the cynical aspects that we're coming across with consumers in airports is their sense of deja vu, seen it all before, nothing new. So what about the unexpected? You know, what about the imperfect? What about all this new stuff, the ephemeral, pop-ups, activations, that kind of thing? So in that sense, it's moving away from this idea of ubiquity. You know, if you look at your retail estate and squint and say, you know, 80% of what I'm looking at in my airport, I can see in any shopping mall, you've probably got a problem in the future. Another aspect of value is customization. Lots of brands are moving into this space, and it's another way of making the airport experience, you know, a here and nowhere else experience. This idea that I can only do something here. Provenance is an important part of this idea, and this brand is interesting in that it's taken something as generic as a vodka and make it very, very unique. Each location has its own vodka provenance, and it's a community that brews it and distills it. And it's that community that decides on the different ingredients that will make it different in that area. Another area we're looking at here is obviously this is the idea of a personalized solution to make a new kind of value. And we're well aware now and quite familiar with the different platforms and tools. Word of caution here, they don't always work. I'm not a big advocate for saying digital for digital's sake. But of course, when it does work, it's very, very useful. You just have to make sure there's integrity and robustness in the platforms and the way it's delivered in terms of content and your ability to maintain it day to day. But it points to this idea that retailers need to stop thinking about making shopping entertaining, because that's been, the entertainment economy has been one of the big sort of phrases over the past 10, 15 years. But we need to make entertainment shoppable. So tech platforms make entertainment shoppable. It's not entertainment for entertainment's sake. It's about, leading to transactions or leading to engagement of a kind. And that future of retail is live as well. So again, in this idea of soft space, much more about events, the idea of you curating spaces where there are more events. This is the Burberry flagship. Or you're taking those events and you're broadcasting that content. Where are you broadcasting your content to? What is your social media strategy in that sense? What is the voice of your airport or your brand and the experience that you create within that airport in terms of when it gets out of that physical space and into the virtual domain? And you can bring all of those wonderful performance and experiences into the experience that give you the content to broadcast. So we're looking at a world where we talk about this idea of physical space, digital space, experience, brands, products, stories, service styles, very much coming into a sense of fusion and blur. It's not like a traditional storefront where you know exactly what you're getting. An example of that will be Westfield. They're both a shopping center developer and operator, but they also create events, rather like an exhibition organizer would do. They create and market the events, they create the platforms, they own the brands that those events are, and they put together the brands that will help them deliver the experience to the consumer. I mean, you'll know this one in San Francisco, which is again a fusion, if you like, and a blurring of different activities, from co-working spaces to event spaces and demonstration areas. So space being used in a very different way. And what's it all about? It's all about people. The more footfall you've got, the more valuable your space is, the more valuable your brand is. And in that sense, data is the new oil. And it's what you do with that data that becomes important. So looking at social data, consumer tracker, our advice now is to get more into this domain where you can make your buildings smart, to measure many, many types of data points around consumer behavior, mood, how the buildings are being irrigated, not irrigated in terms of footfall and so on, so that you can manipulate, shall we say, or manage that space using the big data and all the algorithms that go behind it. But we're not just measuring, if you like, the physical side, we're also measuring the emotional side. And there are many, many companies like this one that can tell you basically your whole life story from the kind of footwear that you're wearing. So, there's this kind of like data privacy ways around this. Just looking at the type, you can measure the type of demographic in the stores or going through the airport just by looking at what they're wearing on their feet. And why is that important? For this idea that we have traditional revenue models in retail right now, from transaction, from minimum annual guarantees, and transactions at the till. In the future, we're going to have different types of revenue as well, and we're working on what those are. For example, mapping path to purchase. You're managing the shopper 3Ps. The idea of, if you understand from an internet consumer's behavior and their profile, personal history, and preferences, you understand who they are. You can connect that sense of search online to the airport experience. So it becomes an inline and an online experience, which is offline and inline combined. So we're saying that in that sense, the future of retail is not just what's in the box, it's in the virtual world around it, it's in the digital behaviors, it's about bringing them into that airport experience. And a really big aspect of this is the whole parallel retail part. Pokemon Go sort of introduced themselves into every part and every corner of the world, and that was their brand. They're probably in your airports or in your stores. It's a virtual digital space. And having a sense of really managing that digital space is going to be very, very important. Chinese supermarket Yihaodian created virtual supermarkets on high streets or streets anywhere in the world. So once again, they kind of like just, in a very disruptive sense, introduce themselves everywhere. Bloomingdale's are working with Blipper and Snapchat to create, using mobile technology and visual recognition to sort of create a different level, a virtual level of engagement for their consumers in their stores. So we've got this whole parallel world, which is another revenue opportunity to look at as well in terms of a new revenue model going forward. So you'll have seen ideas like this before, that we're looking at a world where the relevance of retail in the future needs to have a different set of metrics. These are some of them: ideas, senses, surprises. These are the more emotional metrics of the future. We need to be quantifying, measuring, and understanding how our physical space is performing against these metrics, and we have the tools to do that with data capture. And to summarize, in the future, we believe we need to embrace these ideas. Our physical spaces need to speak like a magazine, change like a gallery, sell like a shop, share like an app, build loyalty like a club, and entertain like a show. And back to the point, retail is changing very fast, but we do believe, despite all of that, that shops are the future. They will just change, and they will do different things for the consumer. So let's get future ready, and thank you very much.
Hello. I would like to thank Carol Ward for inviting me here today. My name's Darin, and I'm from Miami. What they didn't say in my bio is that I'm a big music lover. So, just before I came here, I'm sitting in the bathtub, taking a bath, and I'm reading my iPad. And I come across an article in Rolling Stone magazine on Trent Reznor. Now, Trent Reznor, if you don't know who he is the founding member of the industrial band 9 Inch Nails. He later goes on to become the most sought-after film score producer in Hollywood. He's both an Oscar winner and a Grammy winner, which doesn't happen very often. So the interviewer asks him, "Do you have any new music coming up in 2017? And he responds, "Yeah, I'm working on a few things." He doesn't really want to give too many details away. So the interviewer says, "Hey, your audience wants to know, are you working on anything?" So he says, "You know what? A lot of what's being blessed out there as the cool thing feels pretty generic to me. Music has become something that you do in the background while you're checking your email, while you're looking at your phone or whatever. I want to make a record that's challenging for me and for the audience. And I want it to sound kind of ugly and unfriendly, and not suck you in with a sexy hook." He's talking about creating a disruption. A disruption in this context is an action or event created to interrupt a behavior. It's meant to break a pattern. It's unexpected. And it's sometimes out of context. And it causes an audience to stop what they're doing and take notice. Disruptions have become necessary so that we can communicate our messages to our audiences. Why? Because we live in overstimulated times, right? The human attention span is 8 seconds. A goldfish has a 9-second attention span. We're switching from looking at our monitors at work to our phones over 21 times an hour. Trent Reznor goes on to say, "Yeah, the music will be available on streaming services, but if you want it from us, we're selling it as a vinyl. It's going to be something that you have to touch. It's an experiential thing. You're going to have to pick it up. You're going to have to put it on a record player. When one side's done, you're going to have to flip it over and put the other side on. You see it exists in your physical world, right? It's going to live with you. And as you change, it's going to change with you. So he's talking about this idea of taking back control of your brand. He's using a disruption to, first of all, get your attention. He's creating a physical experience with you so you can connect with his brand. And then what he's doing finally is taking back control of how we experience his brand. So consider these things. How do I disrupt my business to get attention? How do I connect my audience to my brand? How is the audience receiving my brand? Am I telling a story? Is it relevant? Is it authentic? So remember that retail is theater, right? The CEO of Limited Brands said, retail will always be relevant because we are pack animals. We need to congregate. He also said that retail is the last free form of entertainment. So these are some of our projects. This is a activation that we did for the Japanese brand Shiseido. It's disruptive specifically because it was the first 3D brand experience in LAX Tibet. Travelers were either forced to walk through it or walk around it due to its location. We also had 3 points of entry, so no matter which direction you were coming from, you were able to get into it. And of course, there were product testers and beauty technicians on site to consult with travelers. And then finally, there was a POS station on site to convert transactions into sales. As you're leaving to go to your gate, 300 feet from the activation site, you're hit again with more brand messaging. The results for the client, over 100,000 direct exposures daily, and over 1.2 million online exposures. We also work with the Japanese, with the Guatemalan brand of rum Zacapa, The objective here, of course, is to get the attention of the traveler, but also to immerse them in the brand world of Zacapa. So this meant transporting travelers to the mystical mountains of Guatemala, and where traditional, give me 1 second. Where traditional basket weaving is still part of the local culture. This is also the inspiration for the design. So as travelers walk into the activation, they're met with fragrant scents of vanilla, cocoa beans, and dried fruits, and volcanic rocks. Of course, there were also brand activation points and brand education points, and we also had sampling of Zacapa rum. The results for this client were direct exposure to their core consumer, which was Hispanic males, but also an estimated 3.5 million direct exposures in a 30-day period. So consider that winning brands have to disrupt, and this is about breaking a pattern. It's about delivering the unexpected. It's about grabbing their attention. Winning brands have to connect. So you're thinking human. Remember that we're still people that need to connect with each other. So when you're connecting, you really need to mean it, right? And finally, winning brands create. Have I created an experience? Did I tell my brand story? Is it relevant? Was it impactful? Remember that your transactions take place in the physical world. So creating a meaningful brand experience is going to be key. And I came across this recently. I think it's very fitting, and it's all about the idea of transcending the transaction. Thank you.
So where's my person with the microphone? Oh, Carol's there. So, oh, Andy, too. So we'll take a few questions, if anyone has them, to start our discussion. I'm not seeing any. The lights are bright. Well, while you're thinking, how about if I start? I'm going to open this up to all of you so you can kind of just talk as a panel. So why do you think so many passengers are uninspired by the commercial real estate at our airports? Go ahead.
I think because there are two reasons really. I think first of all, outside of airport retailing, things have evolved very significantly, and I think passengers are now exposed to a lot more choice and a lot more impressive retailing, as we've seen some of the examples of today. And I think that means that retail in airports, which, let's be frank, has never been necessarily top-notch, actually has fallen further behind in a sense. And I think that's one of the difficulties, and I think that's something that retail in airports has to play catch-up with, to really re-engage with a customer who's very jaded and has got a lot of choice outside of airports, so can give airport retail a miss.
Yeah, I would. Sorry. Definitely agree with that. I think there's lots of things. So the idea that retail elsewhere is probably better is a key one. You know, so you're not getting the best of the best in many airports. Not every airport is the same. So that's the key one. The erosion in many markets of the perception of value is another key one. You know, this kind of consumers know that they've got, you know, same price or better price deals elsewhere. I think the airport environment is difficult for many brands and many retailers, full stop, for lots of reasons, logistically speaking. I think it's difficult to operate in an airport because of all the security issues and staffing issues and so on around that. I think the revenue model makes it difficult for retailers in terms of the investment they make. I think there's going to have to be a conversation at some point down the line around contracts to, you know, if you know, there's a kind of conflict of interest really to say, give me a great shop, but also give me great revenue from your shop. And we work on both sides of the fence, and we see retailers struggling to deliver on the aspirations of airport brands, which are effectively the aspirations of consumers. The bottom line is, I suppose, that consumers are driving the direction of change, and airports need to follow where consumers are going. And I think you can see the clues that consumers are looking elsewhere. And I think that there's a lot of challenges that we see in terms of the trinity, we call it, the airport operators and the retail operators and the brands, the trinity, if you like, of folks who deliver that experience to the customer day in, day out. You know, the conversation around what that trinity does to improve what shows up in airports is going to be interesting to watch, and I think it needs to be, in itself, disrupted.
Yeah, I think it's also about this idea of engagement, and you know, the idea that needs to become part of the brand culture, or the store's culture, is to educate their staff on proper engagement of the consumer. Convenience is a big thing too. You know, how again, addressing the different types of consumers that are coming into the stores. You know, how do we engage them on their level in order to make their experience more enjoyable? I think it's very relevant.
Louis, you said something about, I think one of your pictures showed a design that was rather movable, and it looked very plain but very effective being movable, and that really hit home to me that, you know, how can we as airport operators help our retailers to become more flexible to a changing market, because brick and mortar just has to change so fast. And, you know, our airports are a lot of brick and mortar right now.
Yeah, I think you make a very fundamental point. We, as we were talking about this earlier on, we as designers are in the business of commercial optimization, how to make the most revenue from the footfall that you have, whether it's F&B or retail. That often comes into a kind of conflict with what an architect or engineers want to do with the building. Engineers have one problem, architects have another aspiration, if you like. The commercialization part is often seen as a kind of erosion of architectural principles, For an architect or for an engineer, it's kind of like, you make my life difficult because you want to put F&B everywhere. We say the future of consumer experience is not to have this rather neat and tidy and artificial, frankly, separation of food and beverage from retail. It's difficult to engineer and more expensive, but consumers are tired of having to go to two separate places to do the two things they would like to do. And frankly, you capture an F&B spend and you lose a retail spend and so on. So there are lots of issues around how space responds to both being flexible in real time, because people want to see change more on a daily, if you like, level as an ultimate aspiration. But certainly if you're visiting an airport 12, 15, 20 times a year, how static is it? It should be a lot more it should change more often. But I think we're also looking at new challenges in terms of how F&B can catalyze the retail and be something that creates a much more of a buzzing environment. We see that, playing out, and we all have felt where retail and F&B are coming together. There's a better buzz, a better atmosphere, a better social connectivity, and so on. So I think, we're looking at this idea of architecture and engineering delivering more flexibility, not just in the solution of the hardscape, if you like, but also in the way it operates. We give this analogy. If you're an exhibition or conference organizer, if you work with those guys, they know what it's like to turn around a floor overnight, to create an experience that lasts 3 days, to put it in there and to strike it down over 3 days is a different task. It's a different mission, but it can be done. Now, there are aspects, we say, of that business model and that operating model which are kind of interesting to look at and should be, anybody designing an airport should start to look at that right now.
We have questions? I was having so much fun. Well, I want to thank, oh wait, we do have a question in the back.
Will this session be available for us to access online video somewhere, somehow? Yes. General manager and concessions manager in the country. They have a tough job, and I recognize that, because you get uncontrolled chaos if you just said, hey, you guys do whatever it is that you need to do. But we as retailers, as operators, understand we need to be able to adapt, but we are truly and highly constrained. And everything you're saying translates to the passenger, which to them is important because we're talking about customer service. And when the passenger spends, they're saying, I'm pleased with what you're offering me in your airport. And when they don't, they're sending us a message. So help us, help them, help us.
I'm going to let Andy and Carol take that. All right, I want to thank my panel. They've been delightful, and I've enjoyed getting to know them. So thank you all. We have a little bit of time until the next session in the exhibit hall. 3:30 back here. So all right, thank you.